I'm Lucy from Bookaxe and I'm here today with my review of The Outsider by Stephen King. As I have sat down to film this review, it has to be said, in the distance, I can now hear the gentle rumbles of thunder advancing. So apologies if you can hear them in a minute as they're getting closer, but I'm going to film anyway because it feels super appropriate. Because if you're ever going to get thunder during a book review, shouldn't it be for something by Stephen King? And here we have his newest novel, The Outsider, which was only out last week actually, so it's super new, and it's the book that this month on Bookaxe we have chosen to see whether it justifies the hype. And I have to say, straight off the bat, I so enjoyed this book. I really did. You know, when there's a King book coming out, there is going to be so much chatter around it, and a few of his recent ones, perhaps a few people have said aren't quite what they used to be. But I, for one, really love this book. It is classic King, but at the same time, I felt that it was really original and it was really surprising, and I genuinely didn't know what I was going to get. It is a story about good and evil, really. It is a good classic good versus evil story, as so many of Stephen King's novels are, really. And one that is about sort of the pursuit of truth, I guess. The plot starts in a really abrupt and shocking way. You are thrown straight in on page 1 to this absolutely brutal murder. A child has been found in the most hideous circumstances. He's been sexually assaulted, part of him has been eaten. It is truly the worst crime scene that really anyone in the history of this town, in the police department, has ever been exposed to. The one saving grace, if there is one, is that from the very beginning, it is crystal clear who the perpetrator is. They've got DNA evidence, they've got fingerprints, they've got multiple eyewitnesses. So right from the beginning of the book, you know who committed the crime. It actually is one of the sort of most upstanding members of the community. So it's somebody that everybody trusted and nobody expected. And as a result, the police detective who is charged with making the arrest also knows the man who committed the crime, and he is taking it very personally because this the perpetrator is actually a little league coach, and the police detective's son was coached by him. So he orchestrates this enormous public arrest, or public humiliation really, to make sure not only does everyone know they've got the man that they need to have, but also, you know, they really crucify him publicly. Of course, it doesn't all go to plan, and this is no spoiler whatsoever, because it very quickly becomes apparent after the arrest that the man who appears to have committed the crime has a watertight alibi. Absolutely, completely and utterly watertight. They look at this and they go, how could he possibly have been in two places at exactly the same time? And so the first half of this novel is really a pure crime novel, really. It is like forensic, legal crime stuff galore, trying to sort of decipher what they are missing in this case that can possibly resolve this absolute stalemate. So that is the first half of the book. But then the second half of the book, being Stephen King, gets weirder and weirder and weirder, and this supernatural element comes into it, or at least the possibility of something supernatural happening. So it's kind of really a novel of two halves, which I really enjoyed. You sort of get the best of sort of both elements of King, really. It's a pretty big book, but actually it's fabulously pacey and it is twisty in ways that are so unexpected. But on the flip side, you've got that level of character development that's really satisfying, which I think is one of King's real strengths, is how he manages to balance plot and character in such a satisfying way. And the characters themselves are really, really fascinating. You've sort of got, on the good side, I guess, these cops that genuinely believe in justice, that are trying to do the right thing, as well as sort of, your classic bent cops here and there as well. But one of the characters, sort of the detective that it's driving, this is called Ralph, and I particularly like him, and particularly enjoyed his relationship with his wife called Jeannie, because actually they have this really fabulous relationship where Ralph sort of runs everything by her and checks everything with her, and he asks for her help with the case, and it creates this brilliant dynamic in the book actually where she becomes so much more than a token, which you often see in sort of crime novels, the detective's wife type of thing. She's sort of rounded and drives things forward as well, and I really, really liked that. The other character who I really, really liked was someone you guys may recognise, because it was Holly Gildney, who is actually from the Bill Hodges trilogy of books. So Miss Mercedes, Finders Keepers, one other that I can't remember, but she sort of had a bit of a bit part as Bill's assistant in those books, and then suddenly she appears in this. And I mean, I've read my fair share of Stephen King. I haven't read every one of his books going, but I recognised enough that I was like, oh, hold on. So when King is referencing other murders and other sort of, he's naming people who are murderers, I was thinking, there's something going on here. So it sort of comes back to you if you've read those books, but also you can enjoy it perfectly well if you never read those before. But the reason that I liked Holly coming back into these books so well is because although she's sort of a bit part in the other books, when we meet her here, Bill Hodges has passed away and she's sort of still mourning him, but she comes into her own and she's this fabulously fierce and determined character, as well as being sort of, flawed and having her own limitations and battling her own sort of challenges in order to have this fierceness and solve this case and really drive it forward. And for me, when she comes in about halfway through, actually when you sort of, the novel shifts from crime to the possibility of something weirder, she just accelerates the plot and really, for me, was what kept me driving through the pages. I really, really liked her. There were some interesting things about this novel as well, which were quite unexpected in a way, and it's been a few years since I've read Stephen King, so actually I don't know necessarily whether this is something he does sort of often now actually, but it's not something that I remember from sort of my earlier readings of him. But there's sort of cameos and product placement aplenty. I'm going to @ you, Stephen King, on Twitter, and I'm going to ask you about this, so please do talk to me back. But first of all, we have a very strange but actually really quite enjoyable cameo appearance from Harlan Coben. Not just in passing. First of all, I thought that it would be when one of the characters commented how much he liked his books, but then he comes back and he's actually kind of, sort of a little bit weirdly in the plot. And it sort of stood out to me. I was like, hold on, are these guys friends? Which author would not like a plug from Stephen King in his book? I predict a little bump in sales for Harlan Coben. Thank you very much, Stephen King. But also, I think Stephen King may be on commission from Apple Incorporated, because everybody has an iPad. They all use FaceTime. They even comment that FaceTime is better than Skype. And there's a range of other things. They use MapQuest. They use Math Calculator. He names these bizarre, well not bizarre, these obscure apps that I've never heard of, but I found myself Googling because I wanted to know what they were. So I would really love to know whether that is Stephen King earning a little extra on the side, or whether he's just like, do you know what? I'm Stephen King. I can put in whatever I like in my novels, and he's just having a little bit of fun. It's kind of inconsequential to the plot. It might date the novels a little bit, but actually, when you're Stephen King, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because he's got, 60-something books? He can have a little bit of fun if he likes. And actually, do you know what? He does have fun, because he even references his own books that have been made into movies. There's some bit where he's like, oh, do you know what, The Shining, that wasn't Kubrick's best, or Kubrick, I can't even say his name, that wasn't his best film, was it? So there are moments where you can sort of see Stephen King having a little bit of fun with things. And also, actually, he references the Black Lives Matter movement, and he references Trump a few times in a sort of negative way. So you can kind of hear a little bit the author coming through. And actually, I read somewhere that because this novel is sort of about, plot-wise, finding the truth and how could this person be in two places at once and which version of this person is true, that this was sort of Stephen King's message about fake news, and he was commenting on, the whole fake news saga. For me, I think that's pushing it a little bit too far. I didn't get that from this novel. I think that's a stretch, but I can kind of see, how he is drawing in sort of modern political elements and sticking them into a story about good and bad. Anyway, going off point a little bit, because these are sort of secondary things to the fact that this novel is gripping. It truly is. Whether it convinces me, outright in the supernatural, probably not quite, but that's more, a comment on my own cynicism than his execution, because truly, if anyone is going to get me close, it's Stephen King in this book. So there you have it. Pretty much in a nutshell, I think The Outsider by Stephen King is well worth the hype, and it is a real joy, I think, to see Stephen King doing classic Stephen and knocking it out the park. So we will be back soon with another video, which is going to be a summary of all the books on the Women's Prize and what we thought of those, and also our predictions. So please do subscribe to our channel, and also check out bookaxe.com for all your book recommendation requirements. And that's it, pretty much. We'll see you soon. Thank you for watching.